You have up to 15 minutes. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I am very pleased to bring this adjournment debate to discuss the economic recovery of businesses in South Down following the devastating flooding across the southeast of Northern Ireland last year. I thank the Minister for his attendance, and I know he has first-hand experience of this issue himself, being a representative for Newry City, which was also badly impacted by last year's floods. I am delighted that he has overseen the opening of the second phase of flood recovery funding just this afternoon, which represents a substantial package of funding schemes to help businesses recover and rebuild. I am particularly pleased that this has coincided perfectly with this debate. Unprecedented levels of rainfall across Northern Ireland during Halloween week last year resulted in historic flooding across the country, most severely felt in parts of Downpatrick, Newcastle, Newry and Portadown. As this debate is focused on economic recovery in South Down, most of my comments will therefore be focused on the impact these floods had on local businesses in Downpatrick, none of which should take away from the very real impact the floods had on many businesses in Newry and Portadown, fishing vessels in Kilkeel or hundreds of residents in Newcastle either. The relative impact on Downpatrick and its economy cannot be understated. There are two main commercial streets in the town, Market Street and St Patrick's Avenue. For the best part of 3 days, half of the business premises on these streets were under 4 to 5 feet of water. Many watched in slow motion as water levels slowly crept up throughout the Thursday and Friday of that week. Some were able to remove stock and property from their stores. Some were told incorrectly by public agencies that the water levels probably wouldn't get any higher and they didn't need to worry. And not a single business received any warning or alert that flooding was likely, despite the near full week of rain that preceded it. I can see colleagues in the chamber from all parties who were on the ground as this was happening in real time, watching the water level rise, scrambling to do whatever we could to help, whether that was lifting sandbags, coordinating with agencies and the public, helping people move belongings, and much more. It was a surreal week full of tragedy for those who experienced significant damage to their homes and livelihoods. But it was also one that brought out the best in people, as everyone, politicians, business owners, residents, council workers, fire service, DFI employees, local farmers, banded together to help each other through an unprecedented natural disaster. I have particular memories of standing waist-deep in dirty, oil-filled water with the Minister's colleague, Chris Hazard MP, helping a local business making Memories for You, which sells communion dresses, carry their precious stock out of the shop to safety. I worked with DUP councillor Alan Lewis, who, despite not representing Downpatrick DEA, travelled to help clear out debris and rescue what stock we could from JJ Donnelly Menswear after the floodwater had receded, and indeed, together with SDLP colleagues, helped Tom's Wine Barrel move its stock to a safer location. And indeed, local politicians were not immune from the impact of the floods, with my own constituency office even flooding. However, any damage there paled in comparison to what many others experienced. I watched our local community come together in the clean-up effort and beyond to support and rally around our local business community, and saw firsthand the trauma experienced by those who in a matter of hours saw their livelihoods literally washed away, with no idea if they would get any support to help them rebuild. The mental health impact of this cannot be understated, and whilst we are talking today about economic recovery, many people have rightly compared the loss of a family business to the loss of a friend or relative, and regardless of any financial package, the trauma experienced during those few days will stay with many people a very long time. Incredible resilience has been shown by the entire Downpatrick community, but this resilience has been tested time and time again as they have had to wait almost 4 months for this latest funding round to open. I know this is not the Minister's fault and that he has moved to realise this second phase as quickly as possible since coming into office. It is a fact, however, that businesses in my constituency and in his should never have had to go with a begging bowl to a Tory Secretary of State asking for bits and pieces of reappropriated funding to be packaged together as a flood relief fund. Instead, we should have had locally accountable ministers on the ground on day one of the flooding, working together to develop an adequate and urgent flood relief fund. And I have no doubt that the absence of an executive contributed to the insecurity and worry experienced by many during and after the floods. Something we can do now that the executive is restored is ensure that this never happens again. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are at any time just a few days of heavy rainfall away from the same disaster we saw last year, which represents an existential and ever-present threat to our local economy. Our flood defences in Downpatrick are still inadequate. Our main river, the Coyle, remains choked and blocked with toxic sludge and silt from years of neglect and mismanagement. Our stormwater infrastructure is totally insufficient, and nothing tangible has been done to establish local flood resilience networks or an early warning system. With the constant threat of climate change, we must prepare our communities, our economy and our infrastructure for more natural disasters like this, and ensure those who have already spent hundreds of thousands of pounds rebuilding their businesses have not done so in vain. Wider questions must also be asked about how flooding this severe happened. Could we have done anything to stop it or minimise its impact? I know that in Newry there are questions over how the canal flooded, given how it is basically impossible for canals to flood if managed properly. Could targeted clearance and dredging of the River Coyle have increased its capacity, reducing the amount of water that flowed into the town? I appreciate that these are questions for another day and another minister, and I welcome the commitment from DFI Rivers to lead a review of what happened and review the adequacy of flood defences in the area. Turning to the announcement from the Minister last week, Newry Morning Down Council opening applications for the next round of funding today, I know that there will be many businesses in my constituency breathing a deep sigh of relief that further help is on its way. The fund is generous, up to £100,000 based on an assessment of losses. And I know from having personally surveyed all businesses impacted by flooding in Downpatrick that it will be adequate to cover losses in the vast majority of cases. There will always be exceptions, however, and it is incredibly difficult to develop a one-size-all-fits scheme of this nature. I therefore hope the Minister will remain flexible and open-minded when criteria, as well-intentioned as it may be, does not always align with realities on the ground. This was unfortunately the case with the £7,500 first phase of grants developed by departmental officials soon after the flooding. Whilst providing a valuable cash injection for some, many were left exasperated and upset when they were declined for this grant for a variety of reasons without any appeals process. To give just a few examples from Downpatrick, flooded businesses who had just taken on a premises, were paying rates, had planned to open literally the next week, didn't qualify. Neither did businesses who had not received a rates bill due to a LPS administrative error and were therefore judged as not having paid rates, didn't qualify for the grant, or businesses who had flood insurance but faced huge excesses, deductions or gaps in cover. Most sports and non-trading charities didn't get a penny either. There was a significant underspend on this first phase, which perhaps reflected an overly conservative and rigid criteria set out by the department, and it is why I asked the Minister yesterday about his plans for any underspend on this next phase, and I welcome his response that he intends to see the full £15 million invested in economic recovery, and indeed agree with him that we could use much more. It must also be recognised that in a small number of cases, even £100,000 will be insufficient to cover losses. I can think, for example, of a pub and a dentist in Downpatrick with several £100,000 of documented losses, no insurance, or indeed the well-publicised case of Downpatrick and County Down Railway, who have estimated losses of £2.3 million, yet are only insured for £250,000. All the railway will now receive, going by the criteria and the announcement last week, is £5,000, a drop in the ocean, all things considered. I do, however, welcome the fact that the second phase of funding seeks to address a number of the issues that have been raised consistently by both the business community and elected representatives regarding previous exclusions, not least the provision of 2 new hardship schemes, including a £2,500 grant for businesses that didn't flood, but were forced to close or lost out on income due to flood-related disruption, and a new £5,000 grant for businesses and non-domestic properties previously excluded from funding. Whilst in some cases these schemes won't go far enough, it is a good start and will provide a much-needed cash injection for Downpatrick and other impacted areas. I know that today many businesses will be pulling together their paperwork to apply for the £100,000 grants, and I know as elected representatives we will all stand ready to support them through this process. I note that the deadline for applications is the 22nd of March, which hopefully is a suitable deadline to give enough time for businesses to apply, whilst also ensuring funding can be quickly and efficiently distributed. On that point, I would take this opportunity to ask the Minister for indicative timeframes on when he expects the first payments under the £100,000 scheme to be made, and also when the parallel £5,000 and £2,500 schemes are likely to open for applications. In addition to support for individual businesses, there remains an urgent need to invest in wider regeneration and recovery across flood-hit towns. Many of the larger chain stores which help to drive footfall have closed permanently or have not given a date for reopening. Downpatrick has long suffered from underinvestment, with the Council planning to spend tens of millions on regeneration and capital projects in Newry and Newcastle, but have delivered no major investment in recent times for Downpatrick. Downpatrick often feels like a forgotten town, and rightly so. Take, for example, the £180,000 that was given to the Council by the Department for Communities immediately after the flooding to aid recovery in Downpatrick and Newry. Most of it is being spent on St Patrick's Day parades, events which the Council has, up until this year, funded itself. Nothing new is being done to help and support businesses bounce back, and more must be done by the Minister's Department and others if we are to avoid an existential collapse of the local economy in the county town of Down. And we must ensure departmental funding is being spent where it is needed most. I would therefore kindly ask the Minister to outline his department's plans to ensure the medium to long-term recovery and regeneration of towns devastated by flooding. Thank you.
I'll get the button to work this time. And could I call Cathy Mason, please? And all speakers have 5 minutes, with the exception of the Minister.
Deputy Speaker. I welcome getting the opportunity to speak on this today, the flooding in South Down, in particular Newcastle, Downpatrick, in the Mournes, and of course other rural areas. In particular, the flooding in Downpatrick was devastating for the town. Despite extremely challenging circumstances, though, the resilience of our small and family-run local businesses and the community spirit in Downpatrick shone through when everyone stood shoulder to shoulder and worked together to mitigate the worst effects of the floodings. A word of sincere thanks has to be delivered to those who went above and beyond their roles to intervene, from our fire service, council workers, business owners, volunteers and statutory agencies alike. They all come out united in their effort to support their town. Our small and family-run businesses have been under severe pressure because of the extensive damage done by the flooding, and despite the very limited interventions by the British Government, it is welcome that the Economy Minister has announced the Flood Support Scheme, which of course has opened today. I want to wholeheartedly thank the Minister, Conor Murphy, who has listened to the voices of local businesses and acted quickly to ensure that they have access to proper funding and support after what has been a very challenging time. The announcement comes as a huge relief for business owners in Downpatrick and will hopefully assist them to restore their businesses and continue to open their doors to the community. Our small and family-run traders are the heartbeat of Downpatrick. They have been there for decades and some for generations. But there is much, much more work that needs to be done to ensure that Downpatrick continues to thrive. I'd like to take a quick opportunity to give credit to the Downpatrick Regeneration Working Group, who have painstakingly created the Living High Streets framework that outlines a real vision for revitalising the town and the whole community. But it is imperative that the Council now work diligently and proactively to ensure that applications are processed efficiently and that the funding worth up to £100,000 can go straight to helping with the damages from the flooding. We also need to see a multi-agency approach to flood mitigation strategy for Downpatrick Town and a flood defence strategy to prevent instances like this becoming a living reality. We need interventions made to protect the Coil from not only bursting its banks again and further preventing large-scale flooding, but we also need to see the Coil live to its true potential, ecologically and economically. We need the Department for Communities to commit to a regeneration plan for the town, one that focuses on future-proofing Downpatrick, promoting sustainable tourism product and focusing on long-term economic regeneration. We also need to see interventions for our local sports clubs, who of course have been impacted by the floodings as well. And we want to see a more ambitious emergency flood payment scheme for residents in the likes of Newcastle who have been impacted. So I, alongside with my Sinn Féin team in South Down, will continue to work with all parties on behalf of our local businesses to keep Downpatrick thriving. And I thank you for the opportunity to highlight this today.
Thank you. And I call on Diane Forsyth.
Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Alliance member for South Down for bringing this issue to the Chamber today. The severity of the flooding in South Down last October and November was the worst the area has experienced, and the impacts have been devastating. Both short-term and longer-term impacts have been significant. Short-term impacts were heartbreaking. The clean-up operation of lost stock was huge. In so many cases, additional seasonal stock which had been bought in for Christmas season at significant cost. Also, the damage and loss of shop and business machinery, furniture and equipment was immediately apparent and incredibly clear that this would not just be a simple case of moving your business elsewhere to set up somewhere else. Any relocation would require significant set-up costs and was not just a simple move. Costs to be met at a time of devastation and with no income coming in was unachievable for many businesses. The short-term support at the time was not clear enough and was not quick enough to assist people at their time of dire need. In the longer term, many businesses have struggled and taken difficult decisions to close their businesses. The moving of businesses on a temporary basis has displaced the town centre and confused shoppers not regular to the area. The temporary closure of the large Asda store in Downpatrick saw a huge drop in foot flow to the town, and I'm grateful to those at Asda management who so quickly constructed and opened the restoration of a large store to Downpatrick and helped the associated foot flow. The longer-term impact of the flooding is still very much felt. Before the flooding, the local Newry, Mourne and Down District Council had invested much time, money and effort on the Downpatrick High Street Living Scheme, which was energetic and created to give hope to revitalise the town, and I know many around the Chamber were actively involved in that. And right before the flooding, this had great hope, and I was quite energised to go down and join some of those meetings myself, and it was very sad to see where we have ended up now. Yes, of course.
Would the member agree it is vitally important to take this opportunity to consider the need for a long-term solution to the flooding issues in Downpatrick? Thank you.
Absolutely.
And the member gets an extra minute.
Thank you very much. Yes, so longer term is very, very important here, and I welcome the Economy Minister's announcement of the remaining 10 million being made available in the flood recovery scheme, and hope that that aids the longer term recovery. Although, as I have mentioned, it was disappointing that this may be too late to save many businesses, and it's disappointing that despite united and repeated calls from local MLAs from all parties at the time, the Secretary of State did not make enough money available when people were in crisis and needed it the very most. And there needs to be learning from this, learning across many areas, but here I want to specifically refer to the need to learn and develop plans which make us capable of rolling out financial support efficiently and effectively in response to emergency situations when they arise. Obviously, we don't want to see them recur, but when they do, we need to have learned from this. We need to see the prompt rollout of this money, and I welcome the confirmation from our councillors in Newry, Mourne and Down District Council that last night the SPNR committee committed to the prompt rollout of this, and I wish to put on record my thanks to the council for their response and support throughout the time of crisis. They stepped up and took the lead on many areas of this, even though the floods, rivers and road issues were not their responsibility. They were the responsibility of the Department of Infrastructure. The economic recovery also requires there to be a restoration in public confidence. There is a huge concern throughout the area that we might see flooding like this again, as referred to by previous speakers. There has been a long time when local rivers have experienced significant issues and never been resolved. They have worn away areas which have compromised the road network over this time. In the Kilkeel area, this was most evident when the main road into the town collapsed and the area was completely cut off until repairs were complete. There has also been a long period of time where localised flooding on smaller scale has been an issue, with many repeat issues failing to be addressed time and time again. And this, alongside the lack of regular emptying of gullies, all contributed to when we experienced the severe weather and extreme rainfall. The cumulative effect of all of these deficiencies was the absolute devastation that we faced. And I would call upon Department of Infrastructure to urgently publish reassurance to the public as to all the work that they have completed following the flood to assess the risk of repeat flooding and measures that they've put in place to prevent further flooding, and an assessment of the integrity of the local road system, including bridges, detailing where rivers and floods have been repeatedly compromised and their actions. The Department needs to build public confidence to believe that their infrastructure is safe and sufficient and that they are protected against future flooding. And whilst this debate focuses on South Down, I note also the devastation of the flooding caused to businesses in Newry, Portadown and Cumber. Also, we don't want to see this anywhere in Northern Ireland. And in conclusion, there's a lot to be done here to support the economic recovery from flooding. The immediate priority needs to be getting the support to those most affected and in need. And this will be a long recovery process. It will require a joined-up effort with central government, local council and our community groups. We cannot take our eye off the ball, and to me, a huge part of that is critical that the Department for Infrastructure takes urgent steps to ensure and reassure that this won't happen again. I thank the Economy Minister for attending this afternoon, for his prompt action in making these funds available before the end of March, and I call on him to support economic recovery programmes for the South Down area moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Colin McGrath.
Welcome the opportunity to take part in this adjournment debate. What we saw last November was horrendous. It was devastation. We used the term apocalyptic at the time because that's what it felt like. And whilst there were many parts of South Down and beyond that were impacted, whenever you've spent nearly 50 years growing up in a town, to actually see it being absolutely wrecked in front of your eyes was terrible. And it was mostly because of the pain that you could see in the eyes of those business people, because they could see their future being ruined in front of them. And to be powerless to stand alongside them, it was very, very difficult, because there was nothing much that we could actually physically do at that time. And what we do get is we get an opportunity afterwards to reflect back and say, what are the things that could be done differently? What are the things that could be done to actually help people in a much quicker fashion? And I know, like others in this chamber that stood on those streets over those days, for the first couple of days, it was lonely, because there was no officials from any department, there was no officials from any agency there to help us. And that, I feel, contributed to the additional impact that there was. And while we have the Economy Minister here, we need to see a whole executive response so that flooding, if it occurs again in the future, that there is a much quicker response that actually helps people in their time of need. And while we look for the financial resources, it might be unpopular to say it, but about time. 4 months, businesses have been left with very little help. They're losing their entire livelihood, and to date, 4 months later, they've been given $7,500. And they're trying to get their businesses open and running again on $7,500. And they're trying to get through the Christmas period on $7,500. They're trying to pay wages on $7,500. They're trying to take some money themselves on $7,500. And 4 months later, we're opening a scheme. Now, the British government, the Northern Ireland office, announced £15 million back in December. The civil service announced £10 million in December. Then it appeared that £10 million was part of that £15 million. Then the scheme was about to be announced by the Northern Ireland office at the end of January, into the start of February. That has been delayed, and here we are now at the end of March announcing a scheme that's going to open, hopefully, and be sorted out in the next few weeks. These businesses have been waiting and waiting and waiting. And we are where we are. We need to get that money out to them. But what we need to do is to do a review so that in the future, if these things happen again in other places, that it's not going to take 4 or 5 months before a pound goes into somebody's pocket to try and help them to be able to get over what has completely wrecked their businesses or their homes. And we also have the scheme where automatically money can be released from council to help people in homes, but no similar scheme in businesses. That was rejected when my colleague brought it to the executive a number of years ago. And in terms of places like Downpatrick, we know that there is the potential for the flooding to happen again. As has already been referenced, we're only a couple of heavy rain days away from floods again in the future. So we need to see that review that has been carried out by the Department of Infrastructure, and we need to see it ASAP, because if there's changes to be made to the tidal bridges, if there's changes that need to be made to the banks, if there's changes that need to be made to dredging, it needs to happen before businesses are left next autumn or winter in exactly the same place and then being left months and months and months with no help or assistance. Do we welcome this money? Yes. Is it timely? No, it's too late. But let's get it out and let's get it to the businesses that need it.
Thank you. And I call on Sinead Ennis.
Canquilla, and I want to thank the Minister for being here to respond to this debate this afternoon. As many people have said and outlined, and people will be well aware, the storms that hit Southdown and parts of Newry last November were absolutely devastating for homes and for businesses, and many of them were left ruined. As well as that, our roads network and our roads infrastructure around Southdown has not fully recovered from the devastation that it experienced last November. A number of local landslides in Southdown caused massive disruption in Kilkeel, in Hilltown, and perhaps where I want to focus my attention is the worrying for me and for the people I represent in that area, the collapse of the A2 Shore Road between Restrever and Cullowen. And at the time, that coincided with another flood at Ballyedmond, and that meant that those people living in around the Cullowen area were completely stranded, they were completely isolated, and they were completely cut off from the greater Newry area. There was whole communities locked out from accessing vital services, and I think that highlights once again how our rural communities can be left behind in the worst of circumstances. And we often talk about regional balance in this Assembly. And we often think of west of the Bann when we're talking about regional balance and regional imbalance. But I think very often the Southdown area, the Newry area, is forgotten about when we talk about regional balance, because what the floods highlighted was years of underinvestment and no investment in our infrastructure, in our road network, and that left us completely exposed to the flooding and to the unprecedented weather event that we had last November. I was speaking to local residents who weren't able to get to work. Some were forced to take days off, unpaid, obviously having a negative economic impact on workers who are already struggling and adding to the pressure that our local businesses were facing. So it is hugely welcome that the Economy Minister, Conor Murphy, has announced this additional support for those businesses damaged by the recent floods, and financial support grants made available to help these businesses get moving. And as I said, I want to thank the Minister for listening to the concerns of those business owners and acting as quickly as he can to get that support out the door. I would like to say, or I would hope that Newry Morningdown District Council will also work proactively to ensure that applications are processed as soon as possible. But what is worrying, as I've said, is that we are months on since the collapse of the Shore Road, and it still remains partially open. So we're still dealing with the impact of that today. We're still seeing long delays on the Shore Road. We're still seeing the congestion, the headache that it is for people who live in the Mournes, who live in that Cullowen area, who are still feeling the impact. So while I appreciate that Conor's here in his capacity as the Economy Minister, I think DFI also have a role to play in this as well, and we have been proactively engaging with the Minister to find a resolution to that. So what we need to understand as well, that the potential for further landslides and further subsidence on the A2 Restrever Road still exists. We need a joined up approach between DFI and Forestry Service, and we need this sorted out ASAP, because all it will take, and our weather and our climate is constantly changing and it's so unpredictable, and all it will take is another mildly perhaps weather event, and those people in the Mournes, those people in Cullowen will be cut off again. It's not good enough. We need to get it sorted. We need to get it sorted ASAP. And extended delays and closures are just causing significant disruption, and it's not fair on people who live in the Mournes, the Greater Mournes area and the Cullowen area as well. We need to see the Department for Infrastructure working with different agencies, as I've said, in particular Forestry Service, and I have written to the Minister for Infrastructure to ask will he liaise with Forestry Service in order to find a resolution to the landslide and the subsidence issues at the A2 Restrever Road. So I want to pay tribute to the businesses that were impacted in this, for their resilience, for all our locally elected representatives, everybody who was on the ground getting stuck in and being there for our constituents. That's what we're there to do. But as I said, we're still dealing with the impact of this in Southdown, and we need to see swift resolution, particularly for those people in the Mourns, and particularly to reinforce the subsidence issues on the A2 Restreva Road. Thank you.
Thank you, and I call on John Stewart.
Deputy Speaker, as you'll be aware, I don't represent Southdown, but I want to thank the member for bringing this forward today, and to all the members for their passionate contributions on behalf of their constituents. I chair the all-party group of micro business and micro enterprise, and we had the privilege of being hosted at Down Business Centre in December, and I heard firsthand from the businesses there and the regeneration group and from all those in the local enterprise agency just the amount of work that had been done by the community, by the councils, by volunteers and by elected representatives from across the parties to come together to react to the horrendous scenes that they had witnessed in those days and weeks leading up to that meeting. It was truly impactful, and I know that as we stand here today addressing the Adjournment debate in Southdown, that could easily have been constituents in East Antrim who had been affected before, constituents in the North West who had been affected before, constituents in Belfast who had been affected before, and many business owners said there, but for the grace of God go I on this occasion. Mr McGrath talked about the reaction of businesses and how they felt totally abandoned in the absence of the individuals who turned out to support them. And I think that's one of the things that will hopefully come out of today. And I welcome that the ministers come here today, and I welcome the announcement of funding. But there needs to be an automatic response that kicks in when these occasions happen. Yes, we can talk about cross-departmental resources and council having their roles and responsibilities. But when a crisis of this nature hits, whether it's in my constituency of East Antrim or in Southdown or in East Belfast or in the North West, whatever it may be, there needs to be an assurance that those businesses know that next morning when they go in and they wiped away the tears from the impact that it's had on their livelihoods, businesses that have no reserves, that can't wait a week, never mind a month or 3 months to get the money because they don't have them. They're not multinationals. They're the backbone of our economy in Northern Ireland. They have 2 or 3 days leading up to Christmas. They don't have the money to absorb that time, and their insurances aren't paying out because they probably can't get insurance because they're in a flood area. So they're totally abandoned. What they need to know is next time this happens, wherever they are in the country, that somebody will be there for them, that this executive will have their back, that the local council will have the statutory responsibility to kick in, that rates will be automatically alleviated for the period of time that they're being affected, and the money will be in their account in the days following that incident, because it cannot be the case that they just have to hold their breath and pray, because it will happen again. It undoubtedly will happen again, and we know that, Minister, and sadly that is the case. We've seen it time and time again over many years, and sadly on this occasion it was the business owners of Southdown, but it will inevitably be business owners elsewhere. We also need to look at the criteria. I know whenever I was speaking to businesses affected, they felt that yes, while there was a pot of money identified by the civil service and then by the NIO, some just weren't eligible, even though they had no insurance in place and they couldn't tap into that funding. And quite frankly, they went under because they do not have the resources, the backbone financially to get by, because they're like so many people in our economy. They are 1 or 2 people bands. You know, that's the business they run, and they run to stand still. They often run a deficit, but they are the backbone of our economy, so they just want to know that they have our backs. The final thing I want to touch on is that block the insurance. And if possible, Minister, if we could look at maybe tapping into the scheme that the UK government is running, which I think is called Insure FE, or Flood RE, where they have an initiative between the UK government and insurers for flood cover in areas that are particularly affected. That is something we need to look at, because effectively insurance companies make billions of pounds of profit every year, but we'll never insure an area where they think there's the slightest risk. And that to me sounds quite stark. And then whenever you do get hit, you do have insurance, it takes you months and months and months to get paid out after you've gone through all the rigmarole of trying to get paid out. So we need to find a way of better streamlining that process so that businesses that are affected have easier access to insurance and affordable insurance as well. That's my tuppence worth. I want to thank again the member for bringing it forward and for everyone for contributing, for the Minister for coming today.
You and Colin Liz Kimmins.
And I thank the member for bringing this debate forward tonight. Like the previous member, Southdown isn't my constituency, but Newry and Armagh were particularly badly hit as well by this unprecedented event, and I think others will agree it's something we've never seen before. And parts of Newry city centre and South Armagh saw devastation that was just unforeseen, and I think are still dealing with it to this day, and it will be a long time before they ever fully recover. I think it's important to pay tribute to the significant community response that we saw. It was definitely all hands on deck. I was on the ground from the morning of the flooding, and it was incredible to see the community come together. And I want to mention particularly Newry Bid in Newry City Centre, who made a Trojan effort to support all the businesses across our city. And many of those businesses are still closed, even as recent as this afternoon. I've been speaking to some of the businesses in Newry who don't even know when they're going to get open due to the damage, which is sometimes not even directly in their premises, but also in adjoining premises, which is impacting access and things like that. It is clear, and as others have said, we need a cross-departmental approach to deal with this, because there's so many elements that we need to look at. We need to find out why this happened. We need to find out what worked well, what didn't work well. But that will require all relevant departments to put their shoulder to the wheel and look at this and make sure we learn learn lessons and deliver to ensure it doesn't happen again. I want to thank my colleague Conor Murphy, the Economy Minister, for bringing forward this scheme. And I think it's important to note, I think we're here 3 weeks now from the restoration of this Executive and Assembly, and the turnaround on that has been fairly efficient, as many of the businesses in my constituency have been waiting 4 months for something to be brought forward. And I feel that he has listened to the businesses, certainly that he and I have engaged with on the ground from day one, who made it very clear what their needs were and how they could be addressed. So I want to thank him for that. But there's one conversation that is missing from this whole debate, and that is about the houses and the homes that were affected throughout this flooding. And they are part of the economic recovery, so it is pertinent to this discussion as well. Because those homes, a very small number of homes across both South Down and Newry and Armagh, have been impacted, and they have been absolutely devastated. I've been dealing with a small number of families in my area who have just been forgotten about. They have been completely forgotten about. And when I talk about flooding and damage, yes, the nuts and bolts and the fixtures and fittings in their home is so important, but in some situations this was life and death. Because I was dealing with a family who were right beside Newry Canal, who were left to get out themselves in the pitch black at 4 o'clock in the morning, with no response coming to them. And the fear that family experienced and how that has impacted them every day ever since, and those children, is just untold. So I am so pleased that my colleague has brought this scheme forward, but I hope that the Minister for Communities is listening and watching on, because we need to see something to support those families. A £1,000 payment doesn't even cut it. I've heard sympathy right across the chamber. I've heard sympathy from the different officials that I've spoken to in the course of the last 4 months, but sympathy isn't going to pay their bills or put a roof over their head, because they're still out of their homes. Those children are absolutely traumatised every time they hear heavy rainfall, and they're wondering, is their house going to be flooded, or where they're living at the minute, is it going to be flooded, and will they survive? And I don't say that flippantly. This is the reality that what we're dealing with on the ground. So we need to see delivery on that, because the flooding impacted not just businesses, but impacted so many families in our area. Their livelihoods have been impacted. They're now worrying about how they're going to pay their mortgage and all the other bills that everyone else worries about on a daily basis, on top of how they're going to rebuild their homes and rebuild their lives. So I hope the Communities Minister will listen to the plight of those families whose lives have been just turned upside down, and as they watch on while other departments fulfil their responsibilities to deliver for businesses and who are within their remit. It is unprecedented, but we now have an opportunity to put the wrongs right, to try and find a way forward that will provide long-term sustainable solutions. That we need effective flood defences, a robust flood response, and we need the insurance system looked at, because all of those affected have been impacted by the lack of ability to get flood cover. So I hope moving forward we will be able to deliver for those people, and I just want to thank the member for bringing this forward this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms Cummins, for keeping to the time. Minister, 10 minutes, please.
I thank the member for bringing forward the debate this afternoon. It's very timely given the movement we've just had in terms of getting the scheme up and running. Also to the other members for contributing to the discussion. And I hope in part of my own address, I'll be answering some of the points that were raised, but I'll try and pick up on some of those at the end that members raised. And obviously, I shared the experience of every one of the rest of you who are involved in this, because with Liz in Uri, we were on the ground trying to assist people. There was flooding in Camlock as well, into households, which we were trying to assist. And I do want to begin by commending that effort of business organisations, community and voluntary sector, individuals, business owners, that all pulled together at a time of enormous crisis to try and assist those most in need, and to try and protect their homes and their businesses as well. So I think they're due huge commendation. It was, as people have said, the wettest, October 23, the wettest in living history in counties down in Armagh. And as a result of that unprecedented rainfall, we had that significant flooding in the council areas. There were around 245 businesses employing around 700 people were directly flooded, with a cost of restitution, repair and restoration estimated at over £100 million. In the aftermath of the flooding, the British Secretary of State announced that unused capital DEL would be converted to resource DEL to fund the response. Initial support included provision of rates relief to around 245 flooded premises, costing around £1 million, and provision of a 7,500 flood damage support grant to help businesses reopen as soon as possible. This scheme was delivered by district councils, and 143 businesses received support totalling just over £1 million. While the one-off grant payment of £7,500 was welcome for many businesses, it was not sufficient, as has been outlined here today. There is a risk that in the absence of further support, some businesses could struggle to continue to trade, and this will in turn impact on the economic future of the areas impacted by flooding. So since taking up my post, I've been working with my officials to provide more support within the envelope of money that we have available. And last week I announced a support package of up to £10 million to provide further assistance to businesses and local economies impacted by the flooding. The support package consists of an enhanced flood support scheme and 2 hardship schemes. District councils will control and administer the 3 schemes within the broad policy parameters set with my department. The councils will be reimbursed for the grant payments using the powers of the Local Government Act, specifically Section 29, and councils will engage with the local government auditor to test their processes and ensure they're compliant in terms of managing public money. The Enhanced Flood Support Scheme opened at noon today. Although each council would administer their own applications, Newry, Mourne and Down District Council has agreed to accept applications on behalf of the other councils. The application form and guidance notes for the businesses which set out the eligibility criteria and evidence to be submitted with applications will be available on council websites. This scheme will provide up to £100,000 to flooded small and medium-sized businesses who, through no fault of their own, could not get insurance that covered flood damage. And in response to feedback from concerned businesses, the enhanced scheme will be open to those businesses that had flood damage insurance in place but have subsequently found that insurance companies are refusing to pay out on some or all of the costs of the flood damage. It will also be open to flooded businesses that were temporarily closed or that had not yet opened but were due to open imminently. I think that addresses the rates point that Patrick Brown raised. These are the types of businesses that were unable to access the £7,500 grant. The grant will provide businesses with funding for refitting costs and also replace damaged or destroyed equipment. Again, after listening to feedback from businesses that have suffered significant stock damage, I have agreed to include stock damage as an eligible cost. The level of support being offered to businesses through the Enhanced Flood Support Scheme is unprecedented, and far surpasses that support provided to businesses impacted by flooding in England, Scotland and Wales. I know the councils will endeavour to pay out grants to businesses as quickly as possible. However, this is a complicated scheme to administer, and I am asking businesses to be patient. Given the large sums of money involved, a loss assessor will be appointed by the councils to verify costs. This process is already underway, and I know you will understand that due diligence is necessary to protect the public purse against fraud and error. As soon as applications have been approved, the councils will ensure that payments follow swiftly. While the Enhanced Flood Support Scheme will provide much needed support to many businesses, there are others impacted by the flooding that did not receive the £7,500 grant and will not be eligible for the enhanced scheme. To help address the gaps, I have announced 2 new hardship schemes that will be delivered by the councils and that will open to applications in March. The first of these is a £5,000 hardship payment to occupants of flooded premises that are not eligible for other supports. These include SME businesses that had flood insurance but that had been adversely impacted by the flooding. For example, in addition to losing revenue due to being unable to trade, some businesses are still waiting for the insurance to pay out, and some will face steep excess payments. I have also agreed to open up the £5,000 hardship payment to non-trading charities, community groups, churches and non-trading sports clubs whose premises were flooded and have faced significant disruption as a result. I have also recognised that disruption and financial loss has not been limited to businesses that have been flooded. Many businesses that were not themselves directly flooded have suffered financial loss because of the flooding. For example, some businesses have no access to their premises, equipment or stock as a result of the flooding. Our customers, suppliers and staff were unable to access the businesses. To assist these businesses, I have agreed to a second hardship scheme. This scheme will provide £2,500 payment to SME businesses that were not directly flooded but were unable to access their premises and hence unable to trade as a result of the flooding. This includes businesses that are located in the upper floors of flooded premises and businesses that were unable to access their premises due to clean-up in the area. I am committed to providing £10 million to councils impacted by the flooding to deliver support to businesses and help secure the economic future of the local economies. £1.1 million capital DEL and £1 million resource DEL has been allocated to my department for 23-24, and given that the majority of costs will fall into the next financial year, I have asked the Minister for Finance that funding around £8 million is prioritised by the Executive in setting the next budget. She has responded to say that while she is content to approve the spend for the scheme, it will be for the Executive to decide on fund allocations as part of its consideration of that budget. This has been a difficult and worrying time for the businesses that have been affected by flooding, and this support package will go some way to helping many of the businesses continue to trade. And just in relation to some of the points, I think some of the points have been answered in terms of my contribution so far, but I agree with people who said, a number of people referenced this, the fact that there wasn't an executive on the ground to make a response undoubtedly caused additional stress as people tried to find someone to have their back in that particular time. And I'm very glad that we now have an executive. I take Colin McGrath's point about the lateness of all this, but I've been in office 3 weeks and we have the scheme turned around and approved and out the door and ready for the councils to take applications from today. So I do think it proves that when there is a response needed, there is an executive is in place. That's the best outcome for our people. Of course, there are other issues raised around town centre recovery and regeneration, and raised by both Patrick Brown and by Cathy Mason, and that will take many departments coming together, but certainly the Department of the Economy will play their role in relation to that, and also with the district councils as well. There is long-term learning, people have made reference to all of that, but and flood alleviation, flood prevention is going to be critical in the time ahead, and I think that is something again which is going to be a cross-departmental issue for an executive, and I'm glad that we have an executive in place back to begin to put together plans. But one issue that wasn't mentioned, I know Liz talked about households, one issue that wasn't mentioned is climate change. I mean, this is becoming a regular, this is not no longer becoming unprecedented. This has become a regular pattern of our weather, and we will continue to suffer from this right across the country until such times as we start to meet targets to reduce carbon emissions and try and address the issue of climate change. So I don't doubt that, as others have raised points about underinvestment in infrastructure, and we continue to support from a lack of finances that we actually need to provide the basic services that we need. But I think that issue, I hope, will be addressed in terms of the Executive's approach to Treasury to try and secure the necessary finances for public services. John Stewart raised the issue of insurance, and of course we don't have responsibility for insurance as a reserved matter for that financial regulation, but I do think that I would hope that we can make collective approaches through the Executive, through Treasury and through the authorities in London to try and get insurance. The response from insurance is one which is either highly costly or very reluctant to pay out on any damage caused, and it's increasingly going to push insurance beyond businesses' capability to meet that, and then we find people trading with no insurance cover, and that can be disastrous for them. I take Liz Gibbons' point about the households, and that it has been the forgotten element of all of this, and I recognise that the funding, which I think was set back in 2007, is clearly inadequate in today's circumstances, and I would hope that the Department of Communities and the Executive are able to do something to address. But again, I thank the members for bringing the debate last Concordia. Very happy to respond, and I hope that the scheme that we have that has opened today for applications will go some way to trying to undo some of the economic damage of the flooding.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for all who took part in the debate. Ladies and gentlemen, Assembly is now adjourned.
Assembly Chamber. Sound. Assembly Chamber. Sound. Assembly Chamber. Sound.